welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. I'm Swastika, and today we're going to talk about election results in Hungary. We go over to Yemen to understand the first ceasefire in the country, and we talk about 10 years since WikiLeaks published Collateral Murder. Now, for our first story, we take a look at the elections in Hungary. Official results from Hungary's general election on Sunday showed nationalist Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's Fidesz party had won a fourth term in office by a much greater margin than pre-election polls had suggested, after a campaign overshadowed by war in neighboring Ukraine. Now let's go over to Abdul, our correspondent, who could tell us more about the elections in Hungary. Abdul, Viktor Orban Fidesz is controversial for neutering both the press and the judiciary. Now his re-election has happened. How do we read the situation?
Well, we should not go into those allegations which were made by the opposition. Okay. These were regular allegations made. Primarily, it was a fight between one right wing versus another right wing. So it was the voters had a choice, very, you can say, narrow choice to elect a person who has promised them to continue with the kind of populist welfare policies which are there, which are needed by the people, and the set of people who opposed it. So if you follow the policies which Orban has followed, why he is popular, why he is getting elected again and again, the opposition in Hungary, as I said before, is right wing. There is no left wing strong presence in Hungary. So the electorates basically has to choose, as I said, that Orban promising to continue with the welfare policies, the populist policies, and against those who basically are opposing it, who say that all the problems in Hungary is primarily because of those economic policies which Orban is following. Now, in the context of the larger economic problems, in the context of the rising energy prices, particularly because of the war in Ukraine and other things, and in the context of when EU has failed to kind of provide enough economic opportunities to the people in Hungary, the choices are limited. And in that context, people have no other option but to vote for those who they think will continue with the current economic policies which sustains them against the economic problems. So it is primarily a reflection on the economic condition. And then, therefore, this opposition's allegation that Orban has basically rigged the election and there are manipulations and so on and so forth is basically a face-saving exercise, nothing more than that. Yeah.
Actually, if you could tell us a little bit more about his policies, Abdul. What kind of policies did he put in Hungary based on which it's his fourth term?
See, as I said before, he's a conservative, hardcore conservative, and he claims he's one of those leaders who claims to be illiberal, which is a very rare thing, correct? Which has appeal in Hungary, surprisingly, because there is a strong sentiment among the larger population against the certain progressive sections. You can say it's a historical reason behind it. We should not go into that given the limited time here. So there is a strong appeal for anti-migration, anti-refugee policies which Orban champions. There is a strong support for a kind of conservatism which Orban follows. And there is a need of kind of, say, subsidized fuel, subsidized food items, subsidized other welfare measures which Orban has implemented in last decade and so when he has been in power. So all these things has created a kind of a ground base. One more thing, this election was also happening in the context of the Ukraine war, which basically boosted Orban's popularity, primarily because Orban promised the electorate that it will not drag Hungary into the war by opposing Russia wholeheartedly, following the European policy, because 90% of Hungary's energy needs are fulfilled by Russians. So if you kind of go against Russians, the prices of fuel will increase, which will further create problems within the, particularly the rural areas in Hungary, which are on the margins of economic crisis. Yeah.
Thank you for those details. Abdul, do stay with us because we'll be coming back to you for the next story as well. Now let's go over to Yemen. An oil tanker arrived at Yemen's Hodeidah airport on April 3rd after 2 months of ceasefire took effect. A UN brokered truce was announced on April 1st by Special Envoy Hans Grunberg. All parties had agreed to halt all offensive military, air, ground, and maritime operations inside Yemen and across its borders. However, shortly after the ceasefire took effect, local media reported Saudi artillery and rocket fire. The attack was reportedly aimed at the city of Sada. Now, according to the Iranian press TV, at least 3 people were killed. Yemeni news agency Sabah also reported other violations by the Saudi-led coalition in Hodeidah and other areas. Now, this has raised concerns about the durability of the country-wide ceasefire, which is first of its kind. Coming back to you, Abdul, if you could tell us a little bit about how did this ceasefire come about?
Well, it was really a surprising thing for most of us, those who are observing Yemen for quite long, primarily because just few days before, both the sides independently had announced their respective ceasefire for 3 days, beginning basically on the occasion of the holy month of Ramadan. But both of them had opposed other parties' proposal on the grounds that they do not fulfill certain criteria. For example, Saudis were demanding that Houthis should participate in their led negotiations, the talks which are happening in Riyadh, called Riyadh Dialogue or whatever. And the second, and therefore Houthis had refused to participate, and therefore the proposal put by Houthis on the 26th March was by and large ignored by the Saudis. When the Houthis proposed, the Houthis demanded of their unilateral ceasefire that Saudi Arabia has to follow certain conditions if it wants the ceasefire to continue. And those conditions were it has to lift the siege which is imposed on Yemen for last 6-7 years. It has to cease all kind of attacks and withdraw its forces from the country. Okay. None of these demands were fulfilled. Okay. And therefore they rejected each other's. Suddenly, but because there is a large international pressure, there is, briefly, just to go fast on that point, there is a large international pressure and there is a favorable condition created by the talks of a kind of deal between Iran and US on the nuclear deal. Mm-hmm. And then there was a long dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran on certain issues. So there are favorable outcomes of all these processes which were going on regionally and internationally, which created a pressure on both the parties to kind of come together and sign a deal. So the deal came in that particular context. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then in which case, how do we understand the ceasefire in terms of its durability?
This is not the first time that there is a ceasefire. There were other attempts made. None of them succeeded for various reasons. But the primary reason was Saudi Arabia-led coalition's reluctance to lift the siege on Hodeidah, on Sana'a airport, and larger territorial boundaries of Yemen. Mm-hmm. They have imposed the siege, claiming that is necessary to prevent illegal weapons to come to the country and prevent Iranian aid to Houthis and so forth. Of course, Iran has denied any involvement in the war and all those things. So this time, the Saudi-led coalition has stated clearly that they will be allowing, as you rightly pointed out, the ships to go to Hodeidah port, and they will also allow the Sana'a airport to open. It means there is a partial attempt to lift the blockade, which has never, this kind of a step was never taken before. Okay. So that is a positive sign. But as you also pointed out, there were attacks. There has been attacks, and Saudi attacks continue. So that is the basic danger, because if it continues for the way it is going on right now. There are widespread reports in the local media and in international media about those attacks. If it continues and there is a larger number of casualties on the ground, destruction on the ground, then Houthis will have no other option but to retaliate. And they have warned that too. So durability is under question. We have to wait and see whether Saudi Arabia-led coalition observes the conditions of these particular ceasefire. Yeah.
Thank you for telling us those details, Abdul. Now let's go on to our third story. Since WikiLeaks published the Collateral Murder video showing US soldiers in an Apache helicopter indiscriminately firing upon unarmed civilians and journalists in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. Let's go over to our correspondent Zoe Alexander to revisit the story that emerged with this WikiLeaks and also the importance of information and the complexity of putting it in context in today's world. Over to you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Swastika, for having me. Yes, it has been 12 years since WikiLeaks published the Collateral Murder video. Just to remind our viewers, this video showed a U.S. Attack on civilians. Two Reuters journalists were killed, Namir Noor Eldin and his driver, Saeed Shamag. This was a video that was released. The incident took place in 2007, and due to the nature of who was killed, primarily these Reuters journalists, as well as several other civilians, Reuters had for long been trying to get access to this footage, and it was only because of WikiLeaks and Chelsea Manning, who leaked this video, that it was able to be received by the public and seen by the public. And now it is in the public domain. And it is crucial because this shows how the US Army killed civilians knowingly. And you can, if you've watched the video, you can hear them talking. It's horribly brutal, horrific. But at the same time, it is very important in people's struggle to know truth and people's struggle for justice, to understand the crimes that were committed by the U.S. military during its illegal invasion of Iraq and its horrific war that it waged on the people of Iraq. And this is especially important because on April 11th, it will mark 3 years since Julian Assange, the co-founder of WikiLeaks, the outlet that published this video in the first place. It was later run and used by many publications across the world, but WikiLeaks was the first outlet that published this video on this day, April 5th, 2010. And, 12 years later, Julian Assange has been imprisoned for 3 years. He has, of course, been in a state of detention in some other ways by being in an asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but now he has been in a high max security prison for 3 years, Belmarsh prison, and he's in the middle of appealing his extradition to the United States, where he is to stand trial for 18 charges, 17 under the U.S. Espionage Act, which is unprecedented to charge a publisher for the act of publishing classified information that was leaked to them. And it's so important to remember this because the case of Julian Assange is really a case of press freedom, a case of political persecution that should terrify journalists across the world. The work that WikiLeaks did, publishing videos like Collateral Murder, publishing classified documents about the US actions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in so many countries across the world, has been crucial for citizens of the world, people in these besieged countries, but also people in the United States to have a better idea of what exactly their government is doing. It is very clear because of the persecution of WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange that the US does not want this information out there. It does not want its citizens to know what it is doing overseas. It does not want the people of these countries to have the evidence and to have the proof of these crimes that were committed against them. There's so many cases of, for example, former detainees who were detained during the global war on terror, who have, through WikiLeaks, found information to support their case, found out about what happened to them. There's WikiLeaks has published the Gitmo files detailing all of the torture that has been suffered by the detainees at Guantanamo Bay, the fact that many of them are in fact innocent. And so as we approach this 3-year anniversary of Julian Assange's detention, today we're marking the 12-year anniversary of the publishing of Collateral Murder, which is really a watershed moment. It's important to remember that press freedom is not free, and that we unfortunately continue to have to fight for it, and that the case of WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange is really it could mark a precedent for anti-imperialist journalists across the world. Once it is a crime to publish information about governments that they don't want the public knowing, this could have effects far beyond Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And so that's why it's so important to remember this day, this horrific video, this horrific crime that was committed against the Iraqi people. It was WikiLeaks, it was Chelsea Manning who brought this to light, who uncovered these crimes, and we must always, as humanity, be in debt to them for their service in the struggle for truth and justice.
Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back tomorrow. Please visit www.peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.